This is Tyler Prochazka, the features editor for Basic Income News with Basic Income Earth Network. I'm joined today by Zoltan Istvan, who is a gubernatorial candidate for the state of California. And what brings Zoltan to the podcast today is he proposed developing land throughout California, federal lands, in order to fund a basic income, and up to, I believe, $50 or so thousand was the potential amount if you developed all that land in California. So I think it'll be a really interesting conversation. So Zoltan, can you sort of tell us a little bit about the recent article that you wrote for Wired UK?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, I've been a supporter of a universal basic income now for a couple years, and a pretty adamant supporter during my presidential campaign in 2016. I supported it, and I continue to support it in my gubernatorial run, despite the fact that I'm now running as a libertarian. Most libertarians would say, "Oh, a basic income cannot fit within the platform," but I believe it can. And so I've written an article recently, a couple articles recently, saying, how basic income actually can fit within a libertarian framework. And just yesterday, an article of mine at Wired magazine, Wired UK, came out and talked about what could become the future of basic income as well as the future of capitalism. And just to kind of take a step back, my original article for my libertarian campaign was from TechCrunch, and it talked about using what we might call a federal land dividend, or kind of monetizing the natural resources of California to help pay a basic income. And the exact amount that I thought we could come up with would be around $57,000 annually. But the Wired article then takes that a next step further and says, don't all the rich people don't have to be afraid of a basic income. Because I think that's one of the things that's freaking everybody out about a basic income, is that the rich are like, there'll be no more competition. But the truth is, because so much technology and transhumanism is coming into the pipeline via science, maybe people could have a basic income, and the capitalists could continue to have also competition through different types of technologies. And the one I specifically mentioned in Wired is the Neuralink. Elon Musk came out with a company where you essentially tie microchips or headsets into to your head, so it can kind of tap into your brain waves, and then you can actually interact directly with machines. And this would allow us to be competitive against the machines, moving forward. And I think that's really what the Wired article is about. But what it essentially says is, we could have a basic income, and yet those that still want to work could also, participate in some type of competition, even despite widespread automation.
So an interesting development kind of with the Libertarian Party is you have a lot of interest from libertarians toward basic income, and I think it's primarily the idea of replacing it with welfare. So replacing the current welfare system with a basic income. So would your proposal do anything to replace the current welfare system, or how would it interact with the current services that California offers?
Well, yeah. So I think, the idea here is that, and this is, the only way you have to understand that I've sort of approached the Libertarian Party. I'm now running, as a gubernatorial candidate there. And everybody knows that I lean a little bit left, further left than most libertarians. In fact, many libertarians have been pretty skeptical of my left leaning. However, I'm trying to, the main premise of my idea has been, if we developed land and resources in California, we would be able to afford a basic income. So with that, we could kind of take out two birds with one stone. A, we could eliminate poverty, and B, we could continue economic growth in the state. And I think that's really the big selling point. And I've also promised to do this all without raising taxes. You just have to understand, California has approximately 45 million acres of undeveloped land. And that means, a huge amount of the state is just sitting there sort of waiting to either be monetized or to serve a purpose. And right now, the purpose of that land is basically for preserving natural resources and preserving, the environment. The problem is that California has 40% of its population, around 19 million people, are living at poverty, below poverty, or right near, poverty. So 19 million people are in poverty. In my opinion, it doesn't matter what party you run for. That's totally unacceptable. We should never have a situation where 40% of a state is living, right at the poverty line. And yet, with so many natural resources, approximately 15 to 20 trillion dollars, we ought to do something so that we could give everybody some type of annual income and monthly income. The idea, though, is that, for libertarians, the big selling point is, okay, Zoltan, if you provide a basic income, do we get to do away with welfare? Do we get to do away with all these other things? And the answer is yes. That is the big selling point for the libertarians. If everybody has an annual income of $57,000, as I have proposed, there would be no poverty. So now nobody needs to be on welfare anymore. Everyone can just get their monthly, basic income split up by $57,000 approximately, and then do what they want to do with that, including buy their own health insurance, including pay for their own things. That's the beauty of this story, is that not only does it eliminate poverty, but it eliminates the use of having to rely on the state.
So I think this is kind of a double-edged sword for a lot of people on the left when you describe it as extracting the resources. So I want to kind of dig into that. For environmentalists, how do you sell them on such a proposal? How will you sustainably how will you engage with the California environment in a sustainable fashion when you develop?
Absolutely. Well, so let me just, first off, paint a little bit of my background. I'm, formerly spent 5 years at National Geographic. I've written dozens of very pro-environmental stories, and I've also been a communications director at a major wildlife organization at Wild Aid. So I have actually spent a good 10 years of my life preserving the environment and wildlife. And in no way do I want to destroy the environment. But more important than the hooded owl, and more important than the trees, are the 40% of Californians that are in poverty. And that poverty line in California is about $24,000. So like I said, we have almost half the state living at that line. We can make all the arguments we want against why preserving the environment is good, but for me, feeding people, feeding human beings, giving them the right education, these are the things that matter more. Now, that doesn't mean that I would just say, to Exxon, go in and just take over this land and do whatever you want. It's not like that at all. And my proposal does not mean selling any California. It just means leasing out parts of the land. But unfortunately, I think the environmentalists are going to have to bite the bullet here in favor of humanity and in favor of eliminating poverty. And you just have to understand, that's one argument. But as my TechCrunch article, and the main premise of this kind of basic income plan of mine goes forward, we're approaching an age where technology is so dramatically changing our world. For example, we're already at the cusp of developing nanotechnology, and we have in some cases. We're at the cusp of, I used to work at Wild Aid, and our main thing was stopping poaching. And it turns out now, that point when I worked at them, that the very best way to preserve the tiger in Asia is not to stop poaching, but to recreate that tiger in a laboratory, 5,000 of them at a time, and release them into the wild. It turns out that genetically engineering tigers is the way to save a species, and not teaching a farmer who's hungry to stop poaching them in China and in Asia and places like that. So the environment can be saved through technology, in my opinion. The environment can be preserved through radical green ideas that are literally just on our front door. And we can do that by putting more money, in fact, perhaps some of the money from the natural resources, into developing radical green technologies to preserve our environment. And last of all, my basic income does not call for selling national parks. Some of the people most against my policy have said, oh, you're going to sell Yosemite. And look, I'm not going to sell any national parks. The plan does not involve national parks. But I just want to point out, too, that the 40% of Californians who are living at the poverty line cannot travel to Yosemite or spend the night there because they don't have enough money to take vacations to national parks. So we also have to keep that in mind. But like I said, I won't be touching national parks.
And can you kind of get into what types of resources does California have it at its to develop? What percentage of California is natural resources? What percentage would you be just developing the land? What exactly, can you paint a picture of what it would look like if you develop this land?
Sure. So, let me just run you through the numbers I have real quick and also explain that anything like this is not overnight. There's, in the past, UBI has been proposed by just saying, okay, we're going to raise the taxes on the rich and everything, that's going to work out. Now, I understand that's not my proposal, because my proposal wouldn't, have any tax increases in it. Basically speaking, 45 million acres of land in California is mostly unused and all belonging to the federal government. And, through that, we could start leasing off parts of it. I don't know how long the leases could be. Could be 99 years, could be 49 years. It doesn't really matter. Could make deals structured and letting major corporations go in and take over that land and say, okay, do with it essentially what you want, but in 49 years, we want it to look just like it was when you took it over. In the case of harvesting timber, we might give a 19-year lease, and that way the trees would have a time to grow back. In the case of natural resources like mining, these are things that obviously wouldn't be able to come back, but maybe they would be able to come back through nanotechnology here in 25 years, where you can recreate parts of the earth. I don't know if it's necessarily important you recreate, iron or mineral resources like nickel and things like that. But the point of the story is that, we could lease this stuff out and let the corporations pay Californians a monthly dividend, which would then provide that basic income. And, say that the only, stipulation is you have to return that portion of the land to us in exactly the condition or very similar to the condition you found it. Now, the reason I love this plan is because it's sort of bipartisan. Right now, when you talk about basic income, the people fighting against you are the corporations, are the very rich cats. Well, this plan says, look, we can make you rich people richer, but we can also make it so that the poor people are no longer poor and they hit the middle class almost immediately. This is why I think this type of, paying for a basic income through this method of, monetizing federal resources is the way to go, because you're going to get Republican support, you're going to get Democratic support, and of course you have Libertarian support because you're not raising taxes, and these resources would end up swallowing a lot of the bureaucracy that provides welfare and things like that. So, you have to understand, I'm not a super hard left-leaning person, so I'm not coming at this trying to say, I want to save the world. What I'm trying to do is make the world a better place and fit within everyone's framework, both the rights and the lefts, so that everyone can sort of get what they want. And those are the numbers of how I would be doing it. I think, but one thing is really important to know is, everyone said, okay, how can you automatically sell all this land? And the reality, or lease all this land. And the reality is we wouldn't do it that way. If I became governor next, in 2018, we would probably start with some of California's coast. California's coast is beautiful and it's worth a fortune, perhaps trillions of dollars. What we'd probably say is to some of the developers, okay, go in there, start developing that coastline, make it so that we could have more people in California, and they would start paying not only, their share of things here, taxes and stuff like that, but also developers would be leasing out that land, and that would start a basic income. It's not going to be $57,000 annually right away. We might, over a 4-year period, it might take 4 years to even get to 5 or 10%. So people get a $5,000 or $10,000 annual income, but it's a start. And it's also a model for the federal government that could do, nationwide at some point, so that entirely get a basic income.
So I think if you dig into the details, I'm really interested about qualifying for the basic income. So when Alaska did its permanent fund, they initially made it they made a residency requirement where you had to be a resident for a certain number of years, and that was struck down as unconstitutional because there was for equal protection reasons. So I'm curious, how do you sort of prevent an influx of people coming into California that want to claim the 57,000 or to start 10,000 and then later on greater amounts of money?
Well, and this is, a very difficult question that just, I don't have all the answers to yet, because my plan is somewhat new and it's so complex because it involves so much money. So we're still working out those kind of technical details. But I can tell you that I'm pro-immigration. I believe that immigrants have made the nation great. As you probably know, my parents are immigrants, so that's why I have a funny name. And so I at some point think that even immigrants should be able to tap into a basic income. But I do think there might have to be some type of residency requirements, because let's be honest, if you all of a sudden offered even $20,000 annually, I bet you'd have a huge amount of across the nation to California, especially if there was a huge amount more land available. I mean, California is that golden state. The weather here is perfect. And if we made it even that much more attractive with a basic income, of course, there'd be a huge amount of people living here. And just, my basic income is not per person. My basic income, the $57,000, is per household. So this is also good because it means that, you would to some extent control this huge influx of I guess people that might want to tap into it. It's not going to end up being like you can come and bring 5 kids and let's say from somewhere in the Midwest and then get $57,000. It would just be one. Every single household gets that amount of money, and the reason that's good is because it means every household then becomes climbs out of poverty. But at the same time, it also gives more incentive for people that want to kind of like focus on, I think, smaller families, and also focus on using that money to become wealthier themselves. You have to understand, I'm coming from a libertarian perspective. I don't want to wipe out capitalism. I want capitalism to thrive aside a basic income. I believe that both can thrive. So I would try to create incentives where nobody abuses the system, where immigrants would eventually get, a basic income. But I don't think we could give it outright immediately, just because, you would basically, you just have a huge amount of people moving to California. And with so much unused acreage, 45 million acres, you have to understand that we have a lot of room for people. We have a lot of room to double and triple our population if we wanted to. So we would have to be careful that that basic income can actually make it so it's a livable income. I mean, wouldn't want to dilute it.
So you mentioned a little bit about the incentive to work. Can you go into what you think the effect on dependency would be? Do you think there would be an increased dependency on something like the basic income, or how do you envision that affecting work hours and work intensity in California?
So I totally do not believe that if you give money to people for free, they will become lazy. I think, first off, studies have shown to be the opposite. I think it's exactly the opposite there. You give money to families and they want more money. And that's why I really like a basic income too, is it incentivizes people to want to become wealthy. And wealth is kind of the cornerstone of, in many ways, the American dream. I think by giving them a buffer and kind of this amount of money so they don't have to worry about survival, then all of a sudden you might see more economy and ways of the economy to transform. For example, I had a journalist at my house the other day, and he said, the bottom line with journalism is I just don't have enough money to sort of survive. I worry about writing articles all day long, and then the quality of my articles goes down, and there's all these problems. If somebody like that, especially artists, had a buffer zone of a basic income, then they could really do the creations that they want. They could really pursue the projects they want. And I think the same thing happens entrepreneurially. If you give somebody who wants to start a business a little bit enough money to take some chances, they're going to boost that economy later in a few years when their businesses succeed. So I believe firmly that you will take the laziness out of the system through a basic income. You will spur people to want to work harder and harder than ever before, because they now feel that they can take the risks that they once weren't able to take.
So you don't support anything like a volunteer requirement or work requirement as a condition for the basic income?
Oh, no, no, no. My basic income is for every single household in California. There's no discrimination whether you're super rich, and there's no discrimination whether you're, of course, when you're super poor. There's nothing. And I think the plan to really pass, and this is, you have to understand, like, I know there's a lot of people talking about basic income now, but you have to understand, we have a Congress that's controlled by Republicans. We have a president that's Republican. We have we have conservatives out there that are trying to make it more difficult for poor people across the nation and across California to actually live their lives. This is a system that I'm proposing, the federal land kind of dividend, or this basic income through monetizing federal land, that can appeal to both people on the left and the right and actually get passed through Congress. Donald Trump, of course, has a huge incentive to monetize all federal land, probably for his corporation. In fact, he's already signed a bill saying, let's look into this. Let's make the big corporations give them this land and make them richer. The only difference is that I want to make sure that that land, which belongs to every single American, actually gets evenly across this entire spectrum, regardless of your, of any kind of discrimination, or regardless of any kind of class whatsoever. And I think that's really what could be a boost for the American economy and also the California economy. And forgive me if I talk in terms of national, the basic income in terms of, the entire nation, but I have proposed the California plan as definitely a national plan as well. And the idea is, let California experiment with it for a few years, see how it goes, and then try to implement it nationally, so that we could actually become the very first country that, has completely provided a basic income of some sort to its citizens.
So before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to sort of pitch your candidacy. Why should Californians vote for you?
Well, Californians should vote for me because I can promise you, from the day one that I get it, become the governor, I'm going to be working on this plan. This basic income plan, or a kind of federal land dividend, is the primary platform that I have my campaign. And I will work so that you start getting a paycheck basically every month for free. And you don't have to do a thing about it. You just have to vote me into office. But the best thing about this is, really, I want to transform poverty. It's just insane to me, as somebody who loves technology and science, that in the 21st century, we have a system where 40% of Californians are at the poverty line. This is something to me that not only doesn't sound right, but actually sounds outright insane. We have the technology, we have the know-how, and we have the philosophy to provide every single Californian a standard of living that would be middle class or better. And we need to do that. We're sitting on $15 to $20 trillion of land just in California. And not doing anything really with it that can give money to people that actually need it and can use it to better the economy. And I think the last thing to understand is, nationally speaking, not just California, but if you take the national amount of resources, federal resources we have, about $150 trillion by most estimates, and you divide that by every single American citizen, you come out to like about 450,000, or nearly $500,000. That means every single American citizen out there right now has, and this is not every household, this is now every single American citizen, has almost the net worth of $500,000. And yet, when you look at the real numbers, well over 50%, well over 50% of Americans have a net worth of $10,000 or less. So that's a big problem. The people who own this federal land, it's kept in a trust for the people, should have a net worth of $500,000, and yet majority of them have just less than $10,000. Something is being stolen from human beings in America. That's just the fact. They say it's being kept in a trust. Well, I don't want environmentalists watching my money, and I certainly don't want the government watching my money or my resources. I want that available to people so that they can use it for education. They can use it for living longer. They can use it for better healthcare. They can use it for food. I mean, we have 15% of kids in America going to bed malnourished at night. We have all this untapped wealth, and we ought to monetize it and give it to the people. It belongs to the people. And of course, in California, it belongs to Californians. So this has been the main premise of what I'm trying to do now as an aspiring politician. Say to people, hey, we can actually make it so there's no poverty whatsoever in California and America. We just have to change the system and start monetizing our federal resources.
So for those that want to follow your campaign, how can they find you on the internet?
Sure. So you can just Google me because there's a lot of news coming out, luckily, all the time. But my website is zoltanistvan.com. That's ZoltanIstvan.com. And of course, I'm on all the social media. So please follow me, and you'll hear a lot more about my idea for a basic income, because I'm writing about it all the time. And of course, it's the central part of my platform. So I'm campaigning on trying to get people to think differently on how we can actually pay for this. And I mean pay for it like we can get Congress, we can get the government to pass this, and we can get them to pass it because they also want it for us. So I think you'll find my campaign, and the listeners will, there's a lot of good stuff hopefully going on.
All right, Zoltan Istvan, it was really awesome hearing from you. So good luck, and I hope to have you back on.
I do too. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, bye-bye.